Howdy folks, welcome to Leo the Lefty. How is everyone? I'm doing alright. It's a half day from work for me, so I thought I'd record a quick episode. Been a bit. I've been working on my other channel, Leo the Lurker, where I read Reddit stories from Am I the Asshole, relationship advice, and all that. I've got 2 videos up so far. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, pop over there, Leo the Lurker, and check it out. I've got, like I said, I've only got 2 videos. I'm hoping to get to another one today. I might not. I might do it tomorrow. Anyway, so today I'm going to tell you guys all about the plague of the Black Death, the bubonic plague. It's called lots of things, but we're going to go with the plague of the Black Death. And I'm using an art piece from this coloring book, Medieval Tapestries coloring book. And I saw this and I thought it worked. This tapestry, it's called Death on His Pale Horse from 1379. Doesn't give a whole lot of information. And a lot of these in this book are AI recreations of actual tapestries. So this is sort of what the real thing looks like. But you can see his hand right here is very funky. And, you know, he actually does only have 5 toes here. But you can see the line there. It goes crazy. But we're going to ignore that and we're going to work on this piece while I tell you all about it. So jump on your pale horse and come along. Speaking of, I think I'm going to work on the horse first. Since it's a pale horse, I'm going to use this kind of ice blue metallic colored pencil. It's just blue. They're not very good at making metallic colored pencils actually be metallic, or in any of the ones I've found so far. These are Art Skills. These are just cheapy ones from the dollar store. In 1346, strain Y emerges in Mongolia. And it, you know, that's about the time they're going to start seeing it show up in Western Europe. It starts in Mongolia, they know. Of course, I don't think they knew at the time, or, well, at least Western Europeans didn't know where it came from at the time. But that's what we know now. And it's going to start spreading, and this, it's terrible. It spreads very, very quickly, and it doesn't take long to take effect and kill. It can kill within, like in some cases, it was like a few hours to like 3 days. So it is very fast moving, very, very contagious, very dangerous, and you know, at the time before antibiotics, very lethal, as we will soon find out. So, in 1346, the Mongol king, I think it's Janiberg, Janiberg, and his army are in the city of Tana when a brawl breaks out between Italian merchants and a group of Muslims. One of the Muslims dies, and the Italians, they take the hell off because they're like, oh shit, we have just, you know, screwed up. So they take off and to a Genoese outpost. So at some point, you know, that's when the Italians spot that Mongol and killed him and fought with his people, you know, they made physical contact with each other, and this is, I guess, where the disease spreads. You know, I found this in my research, so this is the best of my sources were telling me and everything, but I don't know how they know the details of this, because a brawl at the time might have seemed like no big deal, and I guess they figured out that between the fight and the illness, like that was where he contracted it, or they contracted it, the Italians. I don't know. And, okay, so they flee to Genoese, which is an outpost of Kaffa, and King Janiberg followed on land. Yanneberg's army lays siege to Kaffa, and the siege goes on for like a year, and that's when the outbreak starts to happen. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this border colored in. It'll be easier for me to focus if I have all this colored in. So the siege is going on for like a year, and the outbreak starts to happen. And, you know, so you've already got war happening and starvation and limited resources and everything. A siege basically means that there are people trapped inside of usually a town or a building, and there are other people outside that will not let them out, or they will kill them, or they want them to surrender, or, you know, it depends on the terms. So they are trying to get, you know, into the city and everything, and so they start catapulting the bodies of the dead that of the outbreak into the city walls to infect the people inside the city, which is really messed up on both sides, really, but that's what they did. And guess what? It worked. Everybody in Kappa gets really, really sick and starts dying off really quickly. And, you know, people are fleeing from there as it's happening, so they're running to other places, and they are in turn spreading the disease even further. And, you know, that's how we're going to see a lot of this going, that people flee and then the disease spreads further. This is, with this AI, it's hard to tell what's what because the lines sometimes don't make sense. I'm trying to tell where that little horse's rump is. Okay, now this is going to be a lighter blue. But I think it'll be pretty once it's done. So that takes us to May in 1347. Both sides of the siege are decimated. Like, you know, the Genoese inside of Kappa are decimated because of the, you know, outbreak, the lack of food over the past year, and everything has probably just like been miserable for them inside. And for King Yanneberg's side, because a lot of his men were infected and died, and, you know, those were the bodies they were catapulting over the walls of Kaffa, which is, again, very messed up. But, you know, they were quite brutal back in medieval times. That's kind of why, I mean, I love the history because it's fascinating, but I also love, like, the political aspects of it and all that kind of stuff. I love it, and that's why I try to pick events to talk about mostly from medieval history. So, anyway, back to it. So, you know, by then the city is basically abandoned, and they just leave the bodies of the dead there, and everybody starts taking off from Kaffa to, you know, refuge in other places. And just by the sounds of it, it sounds like it was just like dozens and dozens of ships leaving Kaffa. So, very widespread people leaving the area, and they are all sick and all infected. And, you know, the ones that aren't sick are most likely carriers, and nobody understands that back then. And they're just, you know, even if they did, they're fleeing a war zone. I mean, it sometimes that supersedes any sort of illness or anything like that. All right. I mean, we know in our times that basic, like, general comfort and convenience supersedes deadly illness, as we have seen in the past couple of years with certain people that seem to think that an epidemic, a pandemic, is no biggie as long as they don't have to do anything differently in their day-to-day lives. All right, so one ship makes it to Constantinople, but by the time they got there, they had lost 90% of the people on the crew to infection. So they're like, you know, having to dump bodies over the edge of the boat into the water as they're leaving. Let's give him, we're going to make him, should we make him kind of gray? Yeah, we'll make him kind of gray so he's kind of, I don't want to leave him white. I'm going to make him kind of creepy, you know. He's already a little creepy, but he could be creepier. Couldn't you, buddy? There we go. I might even go back over with this gold because I think it's going to be more of a brown. Yeah, I like that. Turn my page of notes here. So, we're up to October 1347, and another ship arrives in Sicily, and the crew and people aboard are barely alive. But, of course, they are all infected, and when they arrive in Sicily, the plague kills half the population, and then the infection spreads to Messina. And, you know, by now people are not only fleeing because of war, now they've caught on that there is an illness going around, and so they're starting to, those that have the means, which is mostly the rich and the royal, are fleeing the cities to get away from the plague, but in doing this, they are, you know, spreading it even further. So it's just going to keep spreading and spreading because people keep doing this. They keep fleeing the city and taking it to a different city, and then boom, there they are. They're infected again, you know. Which I'm sure there was just enough carriers to think like, oh, we beat it, or just enough people that it took them a little longer to start showing symptoms, so they thought, you know, oh, we got out before we got sick and we're okay, and then shortly after arriving or upon arrival, they are at death's door and sick, or just still carrying the virus. Yeah, I kind of like the way that came out. I want to do... Let me get my other colored pencils here. I want to do his robes. Just almost like a dark black. So, by the summer of 1348, or I mean 1347, excuse me, a third of Italy's population would be dead. I mean, this spread like crazy, and people were dropping like flies, and, you know, so many people were dying so quickly that, you know, they had heaps of bodies laying in the streets, and entire families were dying, or, you know, most of the family would die. You had children that somehow would survive it, but their parents would die, and so they would be completely left alone. If they were big enough to take care of themselves or become like, you know, homeless children living on the street, they would do that. If they were babies and couldn't care for themselves, if they were lucky and someone decided to take care of them, but a lot of them would just simply die, not of the plague, but of neglect, because there was nobody to take care of them. Which I don't know if you can call that neglect if everybody who would take care of them is dead. But, you know, they would starve and die of thirst and things like that. So it was very, very sad, very tragic. And it was so widespread that, you know, it's people couldn't really take pity on their neighbor for it happening because it was happening to them too. So it was really hard to find help, and it was really hard to find living people that would be able to help, do anything to help, because, you know, they're with people dying so quickly, you know, crops are not being taken in and harvested and or planted, and labor isn't getting done, which we'll get to that later about what that means for the way the world works in regards to labor and all of that, because it will change things. So many people are going to die during this outbreak. It will change the way the world works because there's just not as many people around. And it's taking out, you know, entire families, entire, you know, generations and things like that. So some people are left without parents, some are left without children. You know, it's rough for everybody. So it's hard for many people to share the sympathy beyond what they're going through, you know, because everybody's going through it together, just like we did a couple years ago. And in that aspect, it gets hard for people to extend a helping hand when, yeah, everybody you know and love is also dead, and there's nobody to help with the labor and production and all of that. So by November of 1347, another Kappa ship arrives in France at Marseille, and another outbreak spreads. So we've gone into like France and everything, and there are other little hot pockets around Europe that are starting to get hit, but you know, it's not nearly as populated as it is now. So it was hitting like isolated villages here and there, but once it killed everybody in the village, it might not spread beyond that, just because maybe nobody left that village and it didn't spread, but it was spreading other ways, so it really didn't matter, you know. And by January of 1348, a new strain begins to appear in Europe, traced through Genoa, brought by another Kappan ship, so it must have, you know, mutated. But I mean, Kappa's like just distributing us all over the place at this point, and it's like, have y'all not figured it out yet? Jeez. But I don't think they had, you know, because you've got, first of all, just lack of knowledge in general of disease and germs and viruses and bacteria and all of that. Nobody knows about any of that back then. But you also have, you know, religious superstition that, oh, this is a punishment from God and blah, 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 blah. So, you know, you've got all that. And just a lack of knowing in general what is happening. I'm sorry if y'all can hear my brother in the kitchen coughing, because I can hear him and he's loud as hell. It's very annoying. Okay. So, in January, that's when the new strain starts to hit, and I'm sorry. The Genoans, because the Kappa, the ship from Kappa goes to Genoa, and they drive the ship away. They're like, no, y'all got to stay on the boat and things like that. I'm sorry, you know. But they end up getting infected anyway, because, I mean, it's just out of control at this point. There's really not a lot that can be done anymore. So it's just spreading. If it wasn't coming in off of a ship, it was coming in from, you know, travelers by land. And keep in mind that Italy is very small, but also the center of the religious, Catholic religious world at that point. So heavily populated in a lot of areas in the bigger cities and everything. So yeah, I mean, it was gonna happen, regardless of any precautions they took at this point, because very few people at this time understand quarantine, but this is where they start to learn. So, you know, Italy's already gone through the first strain, and, you know, just kind of coming through the worst wave of the first strain, when this new strain comes in and starts to, kill out a lot more of the people that had initially survived the first strain, because this one is different. And if they were, perhaps somewhat immune to the first one, they may not be to the second one, and so they get hit really hard again. And the Y persists, heads east from Sicily into Persia, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and Poland. And then South Egypt and Cyprus, which had just had a massive earthquake in 1348 and a tidal wave, was then hit with the strain. So they're getting natural disasters on top of this, plague strain coming through. So, they're, if God is real, he's real pissed and smiting the shit out of everyone. So, but no, that's just, it happens like that, We get something bad going on and then something worse happens. Just how it goes. So that caused a lot of, anguish, death, and destruction in that area. I'm sorry, I feel like my table is shaking and I don't know where I had things adjusted to where it wouldn't wobble, but something must have come loose at some point. So, next, Venice has an outbreak, and Venice will become the first to try like an organized response instead of just like kind of waiting for it to hit and then panicking, So they organize like committees, which the committees start doing ship inspections and burning every ship that comes into the harbor that has infection on it. They burn it. Probably not with the people on it, but maybe. They shut down taverns, which would have pissed a lot of people off, like it did in our own times when the bars closed and people lost their freaking minds. They started restricting wine from unknown places. They sent out instructions for dealing with dead bodies to help minimize the chance of contagion. And despite these measures, 60% of the population would still die. So, but hey, imagine how many would have died if they hadn't done anything at all. So at least they tried something, Goodness. But I think this is kind of when they start understanding, like, quarantining, like, oh, we shouldn't, get too close or interact and all that. And while you have this massive amount of people dying off in such a short amount of time, you've got like entire estates left empty and filled with the dead. So thieves and looting and all that were running rampant. Really, most of them were stealing from the dead, but there was plenty of stealing from the living too, of course. That is just a fact of life through all of human history. But it left a lot of estates and lands and things like that. Just, if the whole family was killed off, then there was nobody there to run it or take care of it or no one to pass it down to. And a lot of things just sat empty because it was kind of like, we got too much going on, we'll deal with that later. Tracking down the next in the bloodline and passing on the lands and yada yada blah blah, all that stuff. I want to do something a little bit different with these vines down here. I don't want to forget that red is an option. I like my colors to be, or my pictures to be a little bit colorful if I can make them that way. So, alright. So, by April of 1348, of course, people are starting, people want to know who to blame. So they start pointing fingers at the Jewish community, which is like so unfair. Like, but that's just the way they thought back then. And so, like, now there's being violence committed against Jews, which we saw that in our times with, you know, people of Asian descent and everything. And it's just so stupid. Like, it's not a race, gender, ethnicities, person, you know, it's not a person's fault. Like, these things are just, you know, diseases are part of being human, or being alive, actually, because everything alive has a disease that can affect it. And many women were being accused of being witches because of it, of course. So if they didn't have a Jewish person to scapegoat on, they scapegoated on women and, you know, killed them through their various witch killing ways, which was usually hanging or drowning. People have the misconception that witches were burned at the stake, and some were, but mostly they were hung or drowned. Burning at the stake was usually a punishment for heretics that the church carried out. So, not so much. Yeah, not so much for witches. Sorry, I lost my train of thought because I heard a noise behind me. So, you know, there's just like this mass panic because of the disease. Everybody wants to blame everybody. And so then when you start blaming certain groups of people, then the panic starts about those specific people. And so then you've got, you know, like violence breaking out. And, you know, not only is this plague killing people, but now there's just like murder running rampant, and it's chaos. And nobody is, you know, working to produce goods, so there's nothing to buy, so there's shortages of everything, which makes people panic more, makes them more violent, more apt to, you know, hurt and kill someone to get what they need. And it's a domino effect that just causes, you know, a complete uproar in society. And because it's a pandemic and it's so widespread and not just condensed to one area, you know, this is happening all over the place. I'm going to bust out with my Crayola crayons here, so just give me 1 second. There we go. So there's, you know, crime, violence, massacres happening, and in April of 1348, in Provence, 40 Jews were murdered under the accusation of being responsible for the outbreak, which is ridiculous. They, you know, obviously were not responsible. So by June of 1348, in England at Port Melcombe, Dorset, the virus arrives and spreads through the town, which sends people fleeing, which, you know, as we know, only spreads the virus further. So that starts to affect England, and it will move all across what isn't a very large territory. You know, it won't take it long to hit Wales, Scotland, and Ireland after that. And England is going to be very heavily hit, just like everywhere else. And it's going to be the same there. You know, there's going to be massive amounts of people dying, labor not getting done, people fighting for resources and for the purposes of blaming each other and all of that. And kind of the same. By the summer of 1348, the Christians are all about their anti-Semitic fuckery and just scary cultish group of dipshits called the flatulence begin to appear in Germany. And um, think about the High Sparrow in Game of Thrones, his little minions and everything. I'm convinced that that's kind of what these guys were modeled after in the show, because they are very much like them. They are the kind that, like, you know, you have to, they whip themselves, but they also cause violence to other people, and are kind of blaming people for not living like they should be living, which is like them. So therefore, that's God's, this plague is, you know, God's punishment for that and everything. And they are zealot, crazy, crazy guys, you know. And so they're kind of like adding on to the um, misery that's happening and everything in the area. And they're, you know, violently anti-Semitic, of course. Of course they are, because they're morons. But by 1350, they kind of like disappear. I think that probably a bunch of people jumped on board at first, and then it got too extreme for them, and so they kind of like lost out. And then the ones that did stick around either died of the plague, or, you know, went underground or whatever, or possibly transformed into some other fanatical religious cult, you know. When the one they're on doesn't survive, they usually will flock to something else when they're particularly cultish. Oh, I'm trying to figure out, I think I'm gonna do his robes red right here, but I don't know what color to do the sword. I think I'm going to bust out a paint pen for that sword. What do y'all think? Ooh, I like that. I might go over it with a little bit of black so it's not so... Oh, that's the sword pommel. Yeah, that looks good. Kind of got outside the lines there because I'm blind. Yeah, I should make this darker. I made his robes too light. I'm going to darken them up some so it kind of pops off the page a little more. I feel like it's not as awesome as it could be. So again, the flatulence were, and it sounds like flatulence, but flagulence were just like they usually traveled in groups of 50 to 500. So, you know, they could cause a little bit of havoc or a lot of havoc. And they were just a bunch of like crazy, shirtless, crazy zealot fanatics that, like, you know, would try to intimidate people into giving up their worldly possessions and joining them. And, you know, sometimes they would like beat the crap out of people, but especially in the Jewish community, because they were extremely anti-Semitic, and so they kind of jumped on the bandwagon that it was all the Jews' fault and everything, which we know is bullshit. And if you don't know that, then you're an idiot. So just know that. Okay. There, I like that robe. It looks a lot better now. Alright, so in Marseille and Normandy are hit hard in the summer of 1348. And the strains split, and one strain moves to around the Belgium area and to the east through Calais and Avignon, and kills up to 50% of the population. The plague is also moving through like Austria and Switzerland, where again they're blaming it on the Jews and murdering them and everything because of it, and it's a whole ass mess, you know, because instead of trying to kind of learn from the other places that aren't so much worried about placing blame but are about getting you know, like measures in order to prevent or mitigate the spread of the disease, they're just like, oh, well, it's easier if we just kill each other. So, you know. And again, the longer this goes on, the more people die, the less people there are to do the work that needs to be done for goods and services. So the less resources there are, which at this time is not very good or convenient. Later, it will change the way people are able to demand a better working wage because there's less laborers. So it has its benefits later, but right now it kind of sucks. So, you know, like along the Rhine, because of rumors that the Jews are responsible, they poisoned wells in towns throughout France and Germany, and Jewish communities are completely annihilated. There are just massacres going on. King Casimir of Poland offers the Jews a safe place and sanctuary to the ones under persecution, and this triggers a mass immigration to Poland and Lithuania. And Marseille was also considered a safe haven for the Jews. So there was a few places, but keep in mind that whenever a king does this in the medieval times, it's rarely out of the kindness of their own heart, and it's more for the fact that they charged the Jewish people more in taxes to live and work in their lands. So they actually make money off of letting the Jews do this because they charge them higher taxes for everything, which is pretty fucked up. So don't be all like, oh, that's so nice of that king. He didn't do it out of the kindness of his heart. He did it because he wanted to get the tax money off of it. And it's something that quite a few kings have done throughout history. Henry II does it. You know, Isabella of Spain will do it. It's just a very common practice to do that, and it is not out of kindness or open-mindedness or equality. It is out of greed. But, you know, it also sometimes is what is necessary for the Jewish people to move to a place of somewhat safety. I'm not going to call it safety because there's, even when they go to a safe haven, they're still not treated well and sometimes attacked and abused and things like that. So we're not going to try to sugarcoat it here. Okay, let me finish his bridle. And then I'll get back to reading my notes. But it's so tiny and detailed, I want to focus on it. See, and I don't know, there's this weird, is that a cloud? Is that the edge of a mountain? Is it a tree branch? What is that? I don't know what that is. AI? I don't know what it is. But oh well. So, and I'm going to talk about King Edward III. Well, first I got to talk about Edward the First, Edward the Second, because his story is wild, and Isabella, his wife, and then Edward the Third. But like 20 years before, because this is 1348 in October, like almost 20 years before this, when King Edward is becoming the king under the circumstances that he becomes king, that is a trip, that is a wild ride, and it is very juicy and dramatic, and I'll tell y'all all about that. He's going to be later on. He's a Plantagenet, Edward the Third is, and I'm doing a whole series on the Plantagenets. You know, I'm trying to kind of jump around, doing true crime history, blah, blah, blah. So eventually I'll get to the Edwards, I guess we could call them, and what goes on in their era and everything. But because of some of the things that happened 20 years before, his mother, Isabel, would be in England. Some people would blame her for the plague because of some things that went down with her, like 20 years before. It's kind of ridiculous, but anyway, I'll talk to you all about that in another episode. This is about the Black Plague. This is not about the Plantagenets. But I do have a whole separate playlist for the Plantagenet saga / drama, and I'll be adding all my relevant episodes on that playlist. So if you want to hear all about the Plantagenets, just pull that playlist up, and it'll have all the episodes that I have related to that topic at the time. I think there's 2 on there now. There is Empress Matilda and then Eleanor of Aquitaine. And yes, those are the women involved early on, and they're extremely, extremely important. And so that's why I've done episodes on them, because I feel like we need to tell their stories, and then I'll tell the men's stories. But I wanted to tell their stories first and separately, because they are literally just as important as their male counterparts in their time. And I thought they should be featured on their own and not just wife of, mother of, daughter of, you know? So anyhow, King Edward III in October 1348, he's sending his daughter Joan to get married, and she gets sick on the boat and never even reaches her destination, and she dies on the boat. And the plague by this point is spreading across London and the rest of England. It's just devastating the populations there, and many, many, many hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. And, it on average kills about or a little more than a third of the population everywhere it hits. So it's very virulent and scary and fast-moving and deadly. Because lots of times it's killing people before they even have really enough time to realize they're sick. They don't feel well, and then they lay down, and then if they wake up, they don't wake up for long, and then they're dead. So February 1349, Christian trigger warning, because they are at it again. In February 14th in Strasbourg, 2,000 Jewish people are burned alive because of the panic of the plague. Yep. So there is that. And again, they are burned alive because they are believed to have caused it. So, stupid. Very, very stupid. And then the following spring, it's February when that happens. And then in the spring, another 3,000 Jews try to defend themselves in Mainz, but are overcome and slaughtered by the Christians. So it just keeps happening. April of 1349, Wales is hit by people fleeing the larger English cities, and 100,000 people die. And by hit, I mean they get people running to the Welsh countryside to flee the cities, and that spreads the disease even more, so 100,000 people die. And Wales, at the time, it had a healthy population, healthy as in a healthy number of people, but it's little dotted villages and sparsely sprinkled around the Welsh countryside. By July, an English ship carrying the disease arrives in Norway and runs aground in Bergen. And the crew is dead by the end of the week, and the virus spreads there into Denmark. So now we're getting up in the, you know, northern Slavic countries, and it starts spreading there, which it's already kind of hit a little bit, but again, it might kind of piffle out in smaller villages, but once it hits a big city, it's donezo from there. And it reaches Denmark and Sweden, where the king believes fasting on Fridays and no shoes on Sunday will please God, and he will end the plague. And you know what? Weirdly, that didn't work. Weird. Yeah. And two of the king's brothers died, and then the virus moves into Russia and also into eastern Greenland. So, you know, I guess you can put your shoes back on because that's not appeasing God enough to end the plague, so might as well keep your feet warm. By March of 1350, Scotland hadn't been affected as badly as the rest of England, but by 1350, it's spreading into Scotland. And because of all the shiz that had been going on with the plague in England, you know, Scotland, who was kind of warring on and off with England at the time, decided they might try a little uprising, and it didn't work, unfortunately. And when the troops went to the border to await orders, they started to get sick, and it resulted in over 5,000 deaths. And this is how they end up bringing the disease home after they, you know, fail in their little uprising, and then it starts getting their families sick and their villages and whatnot, and it really takes off and spreads from there. So that's sad. I'm just going to treat this like a branch because I think that's what it is up here. I still don't know what to do with this back here. Is it grass? I guess I'll treat it like grass. I don't know. I don't know what to do with this, but I'll color this over here as grass. So yeah, I mean, by 1350, a third of Scotland is dead. By 1351, the plague is kind of starting to fade out, and it had killed about half the population of Europe. You know, that's on average. In some places it was like maybe 70%. Some places it could have been 30%. But in Europe overall, half the population is dead. And it estimates between 25 to 50 million people. We still don't know. And then over 210 Jewish communities had been massacred. 1351, 52, and 53, you know, the virus is starting to slow down. Their survivors are starting to think about, like, what life is going to look like now and everything like that. And so, of course, it's affected other areas more than others. And, you know, people are kind of just taking stock of what they lost, what they have left, and where to go from here, and trying to put the pieces back together. The sudden decrease in population, again, like I've stressed through the whole episode so far, has widely affected the world economically and in, you know, productively and things like that. So they're trying to figure that out. And, you know, the people who were in charge before, they want to be in charge like they were then, and they don't want to pay anybody anymore. They want them to do more work because there's less people and pay them the same. But the people that had survived were saying, nah, I can go get paid better over there, and if you don't pay me more, I'm gonna go over there and I'm gonna get paid more. And so that kind of started this talk about, like, whoa, can people, like, demand a wage? That's crazy. Sorry, my paint pen is a little dried out. So, I mean, people are suddenly deciding to go work where they can make more money and have, they can make a little bit of demands by their employers where they couldn't before. And for the rich and employer people, they're all like, what? What do you mean we have to pay you more and treat you better and, you know, not overwork you and underpay you? That's crazy. So that kind of starts this whole debate on, workers' rights and fair wages and, how much can an employer demand of an employee, and, starts to spark questions nobody ever really thought of before. Crazy. Trying to decide how much gold I should put in here. So the feudal system, by this point, it's dying. Like, if you don't have a shitload of poor people that you can push around, it's really hard to keep that kind of system going. I'm gonna use my paint pens. And, the rich folks don't want to lose their ultra cheap labor, and, they try to implement new laws to prevent peasant uprisings and like upheaval and everything, and it didn't work well. Because they didn't have the means to fight back with the common folk anymore, because if the common folk are all uprising against them and their armies are dead or decimated, or even uprising against them as well, they can't do much about it, which is haha funny. I think I'm gonna do his hooves silver. There we go. So, along with the people that died, there's a significant losses of well-established older people in any and every field of work or study. And so you have these younger people coming in with new ideas. So there's like this burst of innovation, like, hey, this was always the way it was done, but it wasn't very efficient, and I'm the new guy, and the old guy is dead, so we're going to try it my way. And so you have like this burst of ideas and innovation, which is going to sort of start leading to the Renaissance, which, again, I will talk about in another episode. And, you've got small outbreaks still happening here and there occasionally, but for the most part, it's not nearly as widespread as it had been in the past, like, couple or to few years leading up to, all this. So while people are still getting sick and dying, for the most part, it's not like things are starting to get back to normal, but there's a little bit of recovery happening in the world. There's people are planting crops again and producing goods and all that kind of stuff. Because there were plenty of people that did just want to get back to work and get life back to normal if they could. And, just like we did, we wanted to do that. I mean, we kind of jumped the gun on it. But especially considering we have a better understanding of what we were dealing with in people in medieval times. But hey, what are you going to do? Some people just can't stand the thought of changing it up for a little bit for the good of everyone, for the greater good. The greater good. Sorry, if you haven't seen Hot Fuzz, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you've seen Hot Fuzz, then you know. Okay, I don't know what this thing is, so we're going to treat it like it's like the back of hills or something like that. I still don't know what this thing is. Anyway. So, because of the less population and things like that, this is going to start shifting things into, like, the area of workers' rights and things employers have to do to keep employees happy and safe and all that. And it's a tragic way for a better turn for the people that survive, you know. And people are more able to pick and choose their jobs instead of going into whatever their fathers were doing or whatever, you know. People can start kind of choosing what they want to do for a living. I mean, it's still going to be very popular for people to take over the family business, the farm, whatever, but more people are getting better choices. So in 1382, Ireland has an outbreak and it's hit hard by it. In 1400, the population is about half what it was 100 years prior in 1300. I mean, that's the world population. In 1466, Paris has an outbreak. In 1559, Amsterdam has an outbreak. And these aren't nearly as big as what had been happening, but I'm just reading them off to you so that you know that, like, it did keep coming in waves for a long time after the initial outbreak of the first time we really started documenting it in the 1300s. So 1559, Amsterdam. 1647, the Great Plague of Seville happens. In 1665, the Great Plague of London. 1666, the plague is hitting England and London until the Great Fire of London kind of burns everything down, and that kind of helps a bunch, you know, kill a bunch of the disease-carrying rats and just sort of probably sanitize and purify a bunch of things, like contaminated buildings and stuff like that. I mean, cleansed by fire, essentially. 1679, Central Europe and England have another small outbreak. In 1710, Sweden and Finland have an outbreak. In 1720, the plague of Marseille hits. In 1770, a plague in the Balkans that lasts about 2 years, which is kind of a long time, but it seems like it was probably just passing around in circles for a while and probably mutating in strains and all that. Which, keep in mind, if they've got any sort of wars going on or anything like that, that's going to exacerbate things and make it spread more. Because when you have people in close quarters, like soldiers and camps and things like that, it's just going to run rampant. Just like dysentery does. And kills thousands of people all over the world since the beginning of time. Okay, before I smudge this, I'm going to add a little bit of gray into the sky. So, according to the Illinois Journal, the Medieval Globe, oh, I'm sorry, the Illinois Journal is one of my resources I wrote down for something else. No, according to the Medieval Globe, the Black Death pandemic was affecting Central and East Asia a century earlier than its documented arrival in Europe. So, basically, like, during the 1200s, before it hit, like, Western Europe and things like that, it was in East Asia doing its thing for about a century before it really took off and spread, which kind of makes sense because 100 years after, you're going to have more trade routes, you've got the Crusades going on, you got all kinds of stuff that is making people travel and commingle more than 100 years prior. I'm going to smudge that and make it look a little better. So we're going to go back a ways to 541 AD in the summer. Scientists have tracked the plague in Egypt, Constantinople, Syria, Anatolia, Greece, Italy, Gaul, Iberia, North Africa, and into Persia, and even all the way into Ireland. 18 waves up to 750 AD. So from 541 AD to 750 AD, 18 waves of the plague had hit all of those areas in that, like, 200-year span. So, what we saw in the Middle Ages in the 1300s was just really one of many, but I think because we were keeping better historical records back then, and because it was just so bad and killed so many, it was just more remembered than these earlier waves, but they did exist. So, and then even after the initial hits and everything, there was, like I said, read earlier, it went from like the 1300s when it started, and then it got progressively worse, and then it kind of faded out, and then pockets of it would pop up. So, like in 1743, 48,000 people died of it in Messina, and in 1770 to 71, 100,000 died in Moscow, and it persisted into other areas of Russia as late as 1879. So some places like couldn't get rid of it. It seemed to just keep coming back. And they might have a respite for a few years and then it would come back. During the mid-1800s, it crept slowly through the Yunnan Peninsula until, it reached Hong Kong in 1894. And steamship commerce would carry the disease across most of the world. And it was mostly limited to the coastal cities because it would arrive and then, it would luckily kind of die out before it made it into the, inner continent and everything like that. So let's talk about real quick the symptoms. The symptoms were swollen lymph nodes on like the neck area and in the armpits and the groin, as large as chicken eggs, and very tender, like that it hurt to be touched and they were warm to the touch. And then fever, chills, headache, fatigue, and muscle aches. Also, pain in the abdomen muscles, extreme cramping, cough, sometimes with blood, whole body fever and chills and malaise, gastrointestinal diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, bleeding into the skin, delirium, shortness of breath. I mean, just all the things. It sounds god-awful. And from the time of showing symptoms, death could be anywhere from 2 to 7 days. And the mortality rate was like 60 to 90% you were going to die if you got it. And incubation from exposure to showing symptoms could be 2 to 8 days. And 2 weeks or less from exposure to death. So this plague was some serious business, which is why it killed so many people so quickly. And for whatever reason, it, other than just trade routes, like, some scientists say they still don't fully understand why it had spread so badly this time. Because even before, whenever there were outbreaks, we still had trade and things like that happening. So, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm barely an artist. So, that is the plague of the Black Death, you guys. And, there's lots of literature and stories, fiction written around it and everything. It was a big deal, and it stuck with people for generations after the main wave hit. So they wove it into legends and tales. And to this day, we still know about it and talk about it. And when we think, like, when COVID hit and everything, I remember there was an upsurge in people talking about and thinking about the plague of the Black Death, because that's what we remember even to this day. And like the Spanish flu in 1918 and things like that. So, but it stuck with us because it killed so many, but also it changed so much, because all of a sudden people could, decide where they wanted to work, and they could demand a higher paying wage. So some of the sacrifices that were made with those that died turned it to where, you know, other people had choices they never would have had to begin with. So I guess if there's a silver lining to this many people dying, it would be that. I don't know. I mean, the only reason I say that now is because even if this had never happened, those people would be dead anyway, because, you know, 1346. But anyway, rest in peace and respect and all of that to those who did pass. So that's it for today, everybody. Thanks for hanging out and listening and watching. And if you like what you see, give me a like. If you want to talk about it, leave something in the comments. Give me a subscribe. And don't forget, my second channel is Leo the Lurker, where I read Reddit stories and react to them and have a different, like, fun little background for each episode. I've only got 2 videos up right now, but I plan on recording and adding more. So check that out if that's your thing. If you like it, subscribe to that channel too. Alright, thanks everybody. Bye.